Alright guys, so we're back at it. We got the parts we needed. We had to wait for them to get here. There's a snowstorm and then we were working on some other projects, so it took us a little while to get back after this. But essentially what we need is these three parts. I'm going to use this solid double D shaft for now, just because I need something so I can move this thing around and steer it while I keep putting it together and get it ready for paint. I'll replace this with a collapsible shaft later, but I had this laying here, so for ease and convenience, I just went with this. But what you really need is three parts. You've got this bottom U-joint. This is going to go on the steering shaft. This is going to go at the steering column, and this will make our nice connection in between. As you can see, it's a double D 3/4 inch on the inside of it. And I like these because they use the locking screws, so I essentially will drill a hole down here to locate this, and then I'll have another one where I divot it just to make sure that the steering shaft can't come loose, and the same on this end. On the bottom, I went with this one just because I had a couple of these laying around, but it's a 36 spline on the steering box, and then it's a 3/4 inch basically. And on the steering column, at least mine, it's got a stock column in it. It's a 1 inch, which is 48 spline. And you know, basically once we make these two connections, get it down to the right length, we'll be able to steer the Chevelle, and it'll look essentially a lot like this one looks, but a little bit different, a little more custom. Like I said, once we have this in here for a while, and after we get this thing painted, we'll replace it with a collapsible steering shaft. So we'll go ahead, throw this stuff in there, and figure out how long we need to make this shaft and start fabricating it. So what I like to do first is get these on the car so that I can do my measurements. So like I said, the smaller one, we'll stick it down here on the steering box, and it'll just slide over. There'll be a flat spot on the steering box splines, which we want to meet up with this lock screw so that it doesn't slide off or rotate. It can't, you know, the splines won't let it rotate, but it's just an extra safety feature. Here's that flat spot on the steering box. And we'll get this one roughly where we want it. It doesn't have to be exact just yet. We're just trying to get an overall dimension for this steering shaft. The thing you want to keep in mind is you need it to be a straight line from here to there, unless you're going to add another U-joint somewhere out here in space. And it's going to rotate, obviously, right? And this is a fixed point. Other than the vibration the engine's going through, this is a fixed point, so you got to watch out for all these. So where you position it on the steering box is going to be important. You don't want to have any bind in your steering, or you know, be scratching your headers or anything else. So plan carefully where you put it. Make sure you check it through the rotation of the steering box to make sure that you're not going to have any interference with the header or with the frame here or this upper arm. And then this 1 inch will work nicely on the steering column. There's a flat spot on this one as well where it's grooved and recessed. We're going to mate that up with this locking provision right here. And we'll go ahead and tighten it down just for now, so it doesn't slide on us. And same thing here, you want to pay attention to anything that's around here. Luckily, you know, at the moment there's no brakes or anything on it, so the real estate's pretty open. But you want to keep in mind that you know, there's going to be other things in here. There's going to be a brake master cylinder here and a brake booster, and we're going to have lines coming down, so we're going to have to make sure we're not interfering with any of that. You know, obviously this is an automatic column at the moment, so we have to keep in mind that. Not that you really have to worry about it for the steering column, but keep in mind the things that are going to be around that steering shaft, just like at the bottom, so you don't have any impingement. You know, the wheel well, we're going to have to set that in here So brake line routing and all that's gonna be important since we're doing that next. So now that we got them both relatively where we want them, I want to seat that lower one just a little bit more. And now that we got that position in space where we want it, we can go ahead and measure for the steering shaft as soon as we find our tape measure. So in this case, it's roughly 14 inches between the two. Now that's just inside to inside. And you're going to want to measure yours so that you know specifically what length you want it. And also now you need to keep in mind, the engagement that you want on either side of the shaft so that you make sure that it fits. But we know we need it 14 inches plus the engagement for each side. And then it's a solid shaft, non-collapsible, so you got to keep in mind that you need the appropriate play on either side so that once you get it in there, you can shimmy it back and forth, or whatever fancy word you want to call it, to make sure that you get everything lined up. And from there, it's pretty easy. Now, like I said, keep in mind, if you use a solid shaft, if you were to get in an accident, now you've created a solid link between your face and the steering wheel and the steering box. So if you were to, in a front end impact, you could push all that stuff straight into the passenger compartment. So for me, like I said, this is just to get me around the shop so that I can have steering while I do all the other fabrication and paint and body work that this thing has in store for it before it goes on the road for the first time. And we'll get a collapsible steering shaft to replace it in the future. I just didn't feel like doing it right now with shipping timelines the way they are. I wanted to go ahead and get this in so that I can get onto the brakes and get on to the wiring and get this thing fired up and get the motor broke in so that I can blow everything back apart and start doing paint and body. So. So that's all there is to it. We got it fabbed up in place. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't screw something up on my measurements and everything before I drilled the last two holes to put in the set screws. So we'll pop it back out, take it back over to the bench and pop a couple more holes in it so we can put in the set screws, and then we'll throw it together and it'll be all done. Okay guys, now that we got everything cut and drilled, we can put this thing back together for one of the last times. So the way I made mine, it's a little bit long, so I have to leave the set screws out when I slide it together, and that allows me to slide the steering shaft down low enough to give me the clearance to get everything together. I'll show you what I mean here. So I leave the set screws out for now because it gives me clearance, and then like I said, I'm going to have to slide it on the shaft. So if you come back far enough behind the number 3 primary, you can slide it in, and then you want to match it up with this flat surface on here, because keep in mind you're not going to be able to turn it once it's on here because it's a spline shaft. And then I slide it on, and then like I said, I tap it down lower than I need it seated so that I have enough clearance to get the upper one on. And then like I said, there's a keyed groove down here on the bottom side of the steering shaft, and you want to make sure that that set screw is lined up nicely with that. So you want to keep everything loose so that you can slide this further up the shaft so that you can get clearance to get everything in here. And we should have the clearance we need. And then from there, you just start adjusting things to where they need to be. You can start top to bottom, bottom to top, start in the middle. It doesn't really matter. You just got to make sure you get everything lined up to where it needs to be. Now you can go ahead and start tightening down set screws. And the easiest thing to do to get the bottom is to jack the car up so that you can turn the steering to make sure that it's lined up to where you got easy access. So I'll go ahead and get this thing lifted up and we'll start doing that. Alright guys, so we got everything installed. As you can see, we got all the clearance we need around the header primaries as well as the upper control arms and all the attachment points there. And then we'll have plenty of clearance around the brake master cylinder and everything. So it's pretty simple. It seems like one of those things that's more complicated than it really is. You just gotta get out there and try it. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. This is just a way to do it. I'd recommend you use a collapsible steering shaft just, as an added measure of safety. But this gives you plenty of clearance, as you can see. And, the setup is adaptable to various different steering columns. Like I said, this 70 has a similar setup, but it's got a different steering column in it. So, you just swap out adapters and you make it work. And, you drill the holes, get everything set up the way you need it, and it's, pretty simple, straightforward. It's really something you can do in a weekend, and then you can get the headers that you want with a little bit more clearance. So next up for the wagon, we're going to start focusing on brakes tomorrow. We'll get the master cylinder in. We'll bench bleed it. Might even bleed it in the car. I'm not sure. It depends on how I feel. And we'll start running lines. And before you know it, this thing will have brakes on it again for the first time in who knows how long. I have no idea. But now that we got our steering set up, that opens the door for all kinds of things. The only reason to do this first is really that it's going to go under that brake master cylinder. It's just easier to get to everything now. And this lets me know how long of a collapsible steering shaft I'm going to need. I could have just measured it without doing that, but I like doing things the hard way, and why not do it one extra time, right? So this is way more straightforward than you might think. You know, it can easily be done in a weekend. Hopefully not all of that had my finger in it. If it did, I apologize. But like I said, next we'll start doing the brakes for this thing. We got a master cylinder and everything ready to go. We just got to throw it in here and start getting the parts and pieces together, and then we'll run all brake lines, all new hard lines. I don't have the rubber lines, but I was going to see if I could make those old ones work again. I probably won't be able to, but at least we can run all the hard lines and show you guys an easier way to do that than using some of the kits that are out there, and for certainly a lot less money than going to some place to get pre-bent lines that end up not fitting right anyway. So really appreciate you guys watching. I hope you learned something from this. Let us know if you have any questions or comments or a different way you've done it that works. You know, we'd be happy to try to do it a different way. Like I said, this is really just what I need to get it around in the garage and around in the driveway at the shop, while we work on all the other things and get it ready for paint and body. So really appreciate you guys watching, and catch you next time.